The film Ben-Hur stands as one of the most iconic epic productions in cinematic history, and much of its enduring power comes from the strength, depth, and presence of its cast. The actors selected for this production were not only capable performers, but also individuals whose careers, experiences, and artistic identities helped shape the emotional and dramatic weight of the story. Each major cast member brought a unique background to the film, and in many cases, the production itself became a defining point in their professional lives. Understanding the cast is essential to understanding why the film achieved such legendary status. At the center of the story is Charlton Heston, who portrays Judah Ben-Hur. Before taking on this monumental role, Heston had already established himself as a rising star in Hollywood. He appeared in films such as The Greatest Show on Earth and Touch of Evil, where his commanding screen presence and deep voice made him particularly suited for larger-than-life characters. Heston was known for his ability to portray moral strength, internal conflict, and physical endurance, all qualities essential for the role of Judah Ben-Hur. His casting was not accidental. He was chosen specifically because he could embody both the emotional vulnerability and heroic resilience required for a character who endures betrayal, slavery, and eventual redemption. Heston's performance in the film became the defining moment of his career. After Ben-Hur, he transitioned into one of Hollywood's most recognizable leading men, often associated with historical epics and action-driven narratives. He later starred in films such as El Cid, The Ten Commandments, and Planet of the Apes. However, it was his role as Judah Ben-Hur that solidified his legacy. The physical demands of the role, especially the chariot race sequence, also demonstrated his dedication to realism and performance intensity. Heston performed many of his own stunts, which contributed to the authenticity of the character's journey. Opposite Heston is Stephen Boyd, who plays Messala, Ben-Hur's childhood friend turned antagonist. Before Ben-Hur, Boyd had worked steadily in both British and American cinema, often cast in roles that emphasized charm and complexity. He appeared in films such as Island in the Sun and The Man Who Never Was. Boyd was known for his ability to portray charismatic yet morally conflicted characters, which made him ideal for Messala, a Roman officer torn between personal loyalty and imperial duty. Messala is not a one-dimensional villain, and Boyd's interpretation gave the character emotional depth. He portrayed Messala as someone shaped by ambition, ideology, and internal conflict rather than pure malice. This complexity made the rivalry between Messala and Ben-Hur more tragic and psychologically rich. After Ben-Hur, Boyd's career remained active, though he never again reached the same level of global recognition. The role, however, remains his most remembered performance, and it is widely considered the peak of his career. Another crucial figure in the film is Jack Hawkins, who plays Quintus Arrius, the Roman naval commander who becomes a turning point in Ben-Hur's journey. Hawkins had already built a strong reputation in British cinema before joining the production. He was known for authoritative roles in films such as The Bridge on the River Kwai. His acting style was grounded, disciplined, and deeply expressive without being overly theatrical. In Ben-Hur, Hawkins brings a sense of gravitas and moral complexity to his character. Arrius is initially a symbol of Roman power and control, but through his relationship with Ben-Hur, he becomes a surrogate father figure. Hawkins' performance is restrained yet powerful, emphasizing internal transformation rather than outward emotion. His role in the film also elevated his international profile significantly, making him a respected figure in both British and Hollywood cinema. Hea Hararit plays Esther, the primary female lead and emotional anchor of the story. Before Ben-Hur, Hararit had appeared in a small number of European films, but she was relatively unknown internationally. Her casting was significant because she brought a sense of freshness and authenticity to the role. Esther represents compassion, faith, and emotional continuity throughout Ben-Hur's journey. Hararit's performance is subtle and emotionally grounded. Rather than dominating scenes with dramatic intensity, she provides emotional balance to the film's epic scale. Her character serves as a reminder of Ben-Hur's humanity and his connection to love and hope. After the film, Hararit did not pursue a major Hollywood career, choosing instead to step back from large-scale productions. Nevertheless, her role in Ben-Hur remains her most recognized performance and continues to be appreciated for its emotional sincerity. Hugh Griffith plays Sheik Ilderim, one of the more colorful and energetic characters in the film. Before Ben-Hur, Griffith had a strong background in stage acting and British cinema. He was known for his expressive facial acting and comedic timing, which allowed him to bring warmth and humor to even serious narratives. His role in Ben-Hur provides a contrast to the film's darker themes, offering a moment of levity and strategic intelligence. Griffith's performance earned him widespread acclaim, and he won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. His portrayal of Sheik Ilderim is memorable for its charisma, confidence, and theatrical energy. After Ben-Hur, he continued to appear in films and stage productions, but like many others in the cast, his role in this epic became the defining highlight of his career. Another important performance comes from Cathy O'Donnell, who plays Tirzah, Ben-Hur's sister. O'Donnell had already appeared in films such as They Live by Night, where she gained recognition for her gentle and emotionally expressive acting style. In Ben-Hur, her role is smaller but significant, as she represents the personal cost of Ben-Hur's suffering and the destruction of his family life. Her performance helps reinforce the emotional stakes of the story, reminding the audience that the conflict between Ben-Hur and Rome is not only political, but deeply personal. O'Donnell's career, while respected, was relatively brief due to health issues, and Ben-Hur remains one of her most notable appearances. Sam Jaffe plays Simonides, the loyal steward of Ben-Hur's family. Jaffe was already an established character actor known for his intelligence and emotional depth in films, such as Lost Horizon. In Ben-Hur, he delivers a performance marked by dignity and quiet strength. Simonides represents loyalty and endurance, and Jaffe's portrayal ensures that the character remains emotionally impactful even in limited screen time. Finlay Curry portrays Balthasar, one of the wise men figures in the story. Curry was a veteran actor with decades of experience in stage and film. The film Ben-Hur is not only a landmark in cinematic storytelling, but also a cultural milestone that shaped how audiences around the world perceive historical epics, religious narratives, and large-scale filmmaking. Its impact extends far beyond entertainment, influencing art, media, religious imagery in popular culture, and even the expectations audiences have for blockbuster cinema. When it was released, it did not simply succeed as a film. It became a global event that reshaped the cultural landscape of its time and left a legacy that continues to echo through modern media. At the time of its release, the world was experiencing rapid changes in cinema. Television was becoming more common, and Hollywood studios were struggling to keep audiences engaged in theaters. Large-scale epics like Ben-Hur were seen as a way to bring people back to the big screen by offering experiences that could not be replicated at home. The film succeeded in doing exactly that. It became a symbol of cinematic spectacle, demonstrating that movies could be larger than life, both visually and emotionally. The sheer scale of its production, combined with its emotional storytelling, set a new standard for what cinema could achieve. One of the most significant cultural impacts of Ben-Hur was its contribution to the popularity of historical epics. Before its release, there were already films set in ancient Rome and biblical times, but none had achieved the same level of technical sophistication or narrative depth. After Ben-Hur, studios invested heavily in similar productions, hoping to replicate its success. This led to a wave of epic films in the 1960s, including stories about ancient civilizations, religious figures, and grand historical events. The film effectively defined the blueprint for the modern epic genre. Religiously and culturally, the film also had a profound impact. It is based on themes of faith, forgiveness, and redemption, which resonated deeply with audiences around the world. The film's portrayal of spiritual transformation, particularly in the context of suffering and forgiveness, aligned with universal human experiences. As a result, it became more than just entertainment. It became a reference point in discussions about morality and spiritual resilience. Many viewers saw it as a modern myth, blending historical fiction with timeless moral lessons. The chariot race scene, one of the most famous sequences in cinema history, became a cultural icon on its own. It has been referenced, parodied, and recreated in countless forms of media. From animated shows to comedy sketches to action films, the influence of the sequence can be seen across decades of storytelling. It became a symbol of cinematic intensity and technical mastery. Even people who have never seen the film recognize its imagery, which demonstrates its deep penetration into global culture. In terms of awards and recognition, Ben-Hur achieved unprecedented success at the Academy Awards, winning a record number of Oscars at the time. This achievement elevated its status from a popular film to a historic achievement in filmmaking. It signaled to the industry that large-scale productions could also be critically acclaimed, not just commercially successful. This dual achievement of artistic recognition and box office success became a model for future filmmakers. The film also influenced the way studios approach production design and budgeting. Its success justified massive investments in set construction, costumes, and large-scale coordination of extras. Hollywood realized that audiences were willing to engage with long, complex narratives if they were presented with sufficient visual and emotional payoff. This led to a shift in how major studios planned their productions, encouraging more ambitious projects in the following decades. Internationally, the film helped strengthen Hollywood's global dominance. It was distributed widely and received enthusiastic responses in multiple countries. Its themes were universal enough to transcend cultural boundaries, allowing audiences from different backgrounds to connect with its story. This global appeal reinforced the idea that cinema could be a universal language, capable of communicating emotional and moral ideas across borders. In popular culture, references to Ben-Hur have appeared in numerous films, television shows, and even political commentary. The imagery of the chariot race, in particular, has become shorthand for intense competition and struggle. It is often used metaphorically to describe high-stakes rivalry or dramatic confrontation. This kind of cultural referencing demonstrates how deeply the film has embedded itself in collective memory. The film also had an impact on religious media and biblical storytelling in cinema. It helped establish a standard for how religious narratives could be adapted for mainstream audiences without losing their spiritual depth. Later films in this genre often drew inspiration from its tone, pacing, and visual grandeur. It demonstrated that religious themes could be both commercially successful and artistically respected. Another important aspect of its cultural significance is its influence on filmmaking technology and production methods. The scale of coordination required for a production pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible at the time. Large sets, thousands of extras, and complex stunt coordination required new levels of planning and organization. These innovations influenced how future large-scale productions were managed, making Ben-Hur a reference point in film production history. The film also played a role in shaping audience expectations. After Ben-Hur, audiences began to associate epic films with long runtimes, detailed world-building, and emotionally charged character arcs. This expectation continues today in modern cinema, especially in genres such as fantasy and historical drama. Many contemporary blockbuster films owe part of their structure to the blueprint established by Ben-Hur. In educational and cultural discussions, the film is often cited as an example of classical Hollywood storytelling at its peak. It represents a moment when narrative clarity, emotional depth, and visual spectacle were perfectly balanced. Film schools and critics frequently analyze it to understand how large-scale storytelling can be achieved without sacrificing character development or thematic depth. The production of Ben-Hur is widely regarded as one of the most ambitious and complicated filmmaking efforts ever undertaken in Hollywood history. Behind the finished film that audiences see lies a production story filled with enormous logistical challenges, creative experimentation, technical innovation, and constant pressure to deliver a film that could justify its massive budget and expectations. The behind-the-scenes history is as dramatic and intense as the story portrayed on screen, and in many ways, it shaped the final outcome of the film just as much as the script or performances did. One of the most striking aspects of production was its scale. The film required the construction of enormous sets designed to recreate ancient Jerusalem, Roman architecture, and sprawling desert environments. These sets were not small studio backdrops, but fully realized environments built on location. The production primarily took place at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, Italy, which at the time was one of the largest film studios in the world. Entire city blocks were constructed, including detailed marketplaces, palace interiors, harbor areas, and public arenas. The goal was to immerse both actors and audiences in a fully believable ancient world. The decision to film in Italy was both artistic and practical. The landscape and historical architecture provided a natural foundation for the film's visual authenticity. However, it also introduced challenges. Weather conditions often disrupted filming schedules, and transporting equipment and materials across international borders added complexity. Despite these obstacles, the production team committed to location because it allowed them to achieve a level of visual realism that would have been difficult to replicate in the United States. The director, William Wyler, played a crucial role in shaping production. Known for a perfectionist approach, Wyler was deeply involved in every aspect of filmmaking, from performance direction to camera placement. His leadership style demanded precision and emotional truth from actors, often requiring multiple takes to achieve the desired result. While this sometimes created tension on set, it also ensured a high level of quality control. Wyler's vision was to balance spectacle with human emotion, making sure that the story remained grounded even amidst its massive scale. One of the most famous behind-the-scenes challenges was a chariot race sequence, which remains one of the most complex action scenes ever filmed. This sequence required the construction of a massive arena designed specifically for chariot racing. The set covered a vast area and included intricate track systems, stands filled with thousands of extras, and specialized equipment to capture the fast-moving action. The coordination required for the scene was extraordinary, involving stunt performers, animal handlers, camera operators, and safety teams working simultaneously. The actors involved in the chariot race underwent extensive physical preparation. Charlton, Heston, and Stephen Boyd trained for weeks to learn how to handle chariots at high speed. The danger involved was very real, as accidents could easily occur due to the speed, weight, and unpredictability of the horses. Many of the stunt sequences were performed without modern safety equipment, which increased the risk significantly. Despite this, the scene was completed successfully and became one of the most iconic moments in film history. Another major behind-the-scenes challenge involved the use of thousands of extras. Large crowd scenes were essential to film's epic scale, particularly in sequences involving Roman public life, slave labor environments, and arena gatherings. Coordinating such large groups of people required careful planning, precise timing, and strict organization. Costuming, feeding, and directing thousands of extras on a daily basis became a massive logistical operation in itself. The production also faced significant financial pressure. At the time, it was one of the most expensive films ever made. The budget expanded repeatedly due to the scale of construction, international filming requirements, and technical experimentation. There was considerable concern within the studio about whether the film would be able to recover its costs. This pressure influenced nearly every decision on set, from shooting schedules to editing choices. Despite the stress, the production team continued to innovate. The film made extensive use of practical effects, miniatures, and carefully designed camera techniques to create the illusion of even larger environments. Since digital effects did not exist at the time, every visual element had to be physically constructed or achieved through optical tricks. This required a high level of creativity from the production designers and cinematographers, who constantly developed new methods to achieve the desired visual impact. The cinematography process itself was highly complex. Cameras were large, heavy, and limited in movement compared to modern equipment. This meant that every shot had to be carefully planned in advance. Lighting was another major challenge, especially for outdoor scenes filmed under unpredictable natural conditions. The cinematography team had to adapt constantly, adjusting to sunlight, weather changes, and the physical limitations of the sets. Another interesting behind-the-scenes aspect was a collaboration between international crews. Since the production was filmed in Italy, many local Italian technicians and craftsmen worked alongside Hollywood professionals. This blending of creative traditions led to a unique production environment where different filmmaking styles merged. The result was a more diverse and innovative approach to set design, construction, and production workflow. The film also had to manage the complexities of animal coordination, especially horses used in the chariot race and other scenes. Animal trainers were essential members of the crew, ensuring that horses were properly trained and safely managed. The unpredictability of animals added another layer of difficulty to filming action sequences, requiring patience and careful timing. Tension occasionally arose between cast members due to the long production schedule and demanding working conditions. Filming took place over many months, and maintaining consistency in performance and energy levels was a constant challenge. However, many actors later reflected that the experience, while exhausting, was also creatively rewarding due to the scale and ambition of the project. The narrative of Ben-Hur is constructed as a sweeping epic that blends personal tragedy, historical conflict, spiritual transformation, and redemption into a single interconnected storyline. Its structure is not simply linear in a conventional sense, but rather built as a series of escalating emotional and narrative movements that guide the audience through years of change in the life of its central character, Judah Ben-Hur. The film uses a classical three-act foundation, but expands it into a much broader epic progression that spans betrayal, survival, revenge, and ultimately forgiveness. The story begins in ancient Judea, where Judah Ben-Hur lives as a wealthy Jewish prince. The opening establishes his close relationship with Messala, a Roman officer who was once his childhood friend. This friendship is central to the emotional foundation of the film, because it represents unity between two worlds that are slowly moving toward ideological and political conflict. The early narrative carefully builds this relationship, showing warmth, shared memories, and mutual respect, while also subtly introducing the growing tension between Roman authority and Jewish identity. The first major turning point occurs when Messala returns as a representative of Roman power. He now embodies imperial authority and expects Ben-Hur to cooperate with Roman governance by informing on his own people. This creates the core moral conflict of the story. Ben-Hur refuses to betray his community, which leads to a decisive rupture between the two men. This moment is not just personal but symbolic, representing the broader tension between oppression and resistance. The narrative structure uses this conflict as a catalyst for everything that follows. Shortly after this confrontation, a tragic accident during a Roman procession results in an accusation of attempted assassination against Ben-Hur. Despite his innocence, he is condemned without trial and separated from his family. His mother and sister are imprisoned, and Ben-Hur is sent into slavery as a galley rower. This section of the story marks the descent phase of narrative, where the protagonist is stripped of identity, status, and freedom. The pacing becomes more intense and harsh, reflecting his physical and emotional suffering. The galley sequence serves as a major narrative transformation point. At sea, Ben-Hur experiences extreme hardship, but also encounters a moment of unexpected fate when he saves the life of Roman commander Quintus Arrius. This act of survival becomes a turning point in his life. Instead of dying as a slave, Ben-Hur is brought into Roman society under Arrius' protection. This transition represents a shift from destruction to rebirth, and it marks the beginning of the second major phase of the narrative. Under Arrius, Ben-Hur gains wealth, training, and status within the Roman world. However, this is not simply a success story. It is a transformation fueled by internal conflict. Ben-Hur is driven by the desire for revenge against Messala and Rome. The narrative structure uses this period to build tension rather than resolution. He becomes physically stronger and socially empowered, but emotionally he remains trapped by anger and loss. The return to Judea marks another major structural shift. Ben-Hur's journey back home is not just physical, but symbolic. He re-enters a world that has changed dramatically in his absence. His family is gone, and his homeland is under stronger Roman control. This creates a sense of emotional dislocation, where the protagonist must confront the consequences of time, oppression, and personal loss. The narrative then introduces the famous chariot race, which functions as both a climax of external conflict and a symbolic confrontation between Ben-Hur and Messala. Structurally, this sequence is the peak of tension built across the entire film. It is not only an action set piece, but a narrative resolution of the rivalry that has defined the story from the beginning. The race is structured with rising intensity, visual clarity, and emotional stakes that culminate in Messala's defeat and injury. However, the victory is not purely celebratory, as it carries emotional weight and consequences that extend beyond the arena. Following the race, the narrative shifts again into a more reflective and spiritual direction. Ben-Hur learns that his mother and sister are still alive but suffering from leprosy, which introduces a new emotional layer of despair and compassion. This revelation transforms the narrative from one of revenge to one of suffering and search for meaning. The structure now moves away from external conflict and toward internal and spiritual resolution. The final act introduces the influence of Jesus Christ, whose presence in the film is subtle but structurally significant. Although he is not a central character in terms of screen time, his actions and teachings influence key moments in the narrative. Ben-Hur witnesses acts of compassion and forgiveness, which gradually challenge his desire for revenge. This creates a thematic shift in the story's structure, where emotional resolution becomes more important than physical victory. The film Ben-Hur is built on a foundation of powerful themes and layered symbolism that elevate it beyond a historical epic into a moral and spiritual exploration of the human condition. While the surface narrative follows betrayal, survival, revenge, and redemption, the deeper structure of the film is concerned with ideas of forgiveness, identity, faith, suffering, and transformation. Every major plot development is connected to a symbolic meaning, and nearly every character represents more than just an individual. They represent larger philosophical or spiritual forces. One of the most central themes in the film is the concept of betrayal and its long-lasting emotional consequences. The relationship between Judah Ben-Hur and Messala begins as one of friendship and trust, but it transforms into ideological opposition and personal destruction. This betrayal is not simply personal. It symbolizes the breaking apart of worlds, values, and belief systems. Messala represents imperial power, authority, and rigid control, while Ben-Hur represents loyalty, personal honor, and cultural identity. Their conflict reflects the broader tension between oppression and resistance. Closely tied to betrayal is the theme of identity. Throughout the film, Ben-Hur is repeatedly stripped of his identity. He begins as a nobleman, becomes a slave, and eventually rises to a position of influence again. However, each stage of his journey forces him to question who he is beyond his social status. The film suggests that identity is not fixed by class or circumstance, but shaped by moral choices and inner strength. His transformation from a prince of Judea to a galley slave, and then to a victorious charioteer, symbolizes the fluid nature of human identity under pressure. Another major theme is revenge versus forgiveness. At the heart of the story is Ben-Hur's desire for vengeance against Messala and the Roman Empire. This desire drives much of the narrative tension and motivates his actions for most of the film. However, the story gradually challenges this mindset by introducing moments of compassion, suffering, and spiritual reflection. The shift from revenge to forgiveness is not sudden but gradual, reflecting an internal moral struggle. The film ultimately argues that revenge may provide temporary satisfaction, but it cannot heal emotional or spiritual wounds. Suffering is another deeply embedded theme. Nearly every major character experiences suffering in some form, but Ben-Hur's suffering is the most extensive and transformative. His time as a slave, the loss of his family, and the destruction of his former life all contribute to a prolonged period of hardship. However, the film does not present suffering as meaningless. Instead, it portrays suffering as a catalyst for growth, reflection, and eventual spiritual awakening. In this sense, suffering becomes a pathway rather than an endpoint. Faith and spiritual transformation form the philosophical core of the film. While not always explicit, the presence of spiritual influence is woven throughout the narrative. The character of Jesus Christ appears indirectly, but plays a symbolic role in guiding the emotional and moral direction of the story. His teachings of compassion and forgiveness contrast with the cycles of violence and revenge that dominate Ben-Hur's early motivations. This contrast highlights the theme that spiritual strength is found not in domination or retaliation, but in mercy and understanding. Symbolism is heavily used throughout the film to reinforce these themes. One of the most important symbolic elements is the sea voyage during Ben-Hur's time as a galley slave. The sea represents chaos, loss of control, and the stripping away of human identity. It is in this environment of total vulnerability that Ben-Hur undergoes one of his most important transformations. His survival at sea symbolizes rebirth, as he is later rescued and given a new life under Quintus Arrius. The chariot race is another powerful symbol. On the surface, it is a competition between two men, but symbolically, it represents the clash between opposing ideologies and life paths. The controlled chaos of the arena reflects the broader conflict of the film, where survival depends not only on strength but on strategy, determination, and resilience. Messala's defeat in the race symbolizes the collapse of unchecked pride and arrogance, while Ben-Hur's survival represents endurance through suffering. The leprosy affliction that affects Ben-Hur's mother and sister carries deep symbolic meaning as well. It represents the physical manifestation of suffering, isolation, and social rejection. Their condition reflects the consequences of political oppression and personal tragedy. However, their eventual healing symbolizes restoration and emotional reconciliation, reinforcing the film's theme of redemption. Water and cleansing imagery also appear throughout the film as symbols of renewal. Whether through the sea, rain, or moment of emotional cleansing, water often marks transitions between phases of Ben-Hur's journey. These moments symbolize purification, both physical and spiritual, suggesting that transformation is possible even after profound suffering. The Roman Empire itself functions as a symbolic force in the film. It represents authority, structure, and control, but also moral rigidity and emotional detachment. Rome is not portrayed as purely evil, but as a system that prioritizes power over compassion. This allows the film to explore the tension between institutional authority and personal morality. In contrast, Judea represents cultural identity, faith, and emotional connection. However, it is also shown as vulnerable and oppressed. The symbolic tension between Rome and Judea mirrors internal conflict within Ben-Hur himself, who must navigate between anger and forgiveness, between external justice and internal peace. The film Ben-Hur is widely celebrated not only for its storytelling and performances, but also for its groundbreaking visual style and cinematography. The film represents one of the most ambitious achievements in classical Hollywood visual design, combining large-scale practical sets, carefully composed framing, and innovative camera work to create a sense of historical immersion that was unmatched at the time of its release. Every visual element was designed to serve both spectacle and narrative clarity, ensuring that the audience could follow intimate character emotions even within massive epic environments. One of the defining characteristics of the film's visual style is its scale. The cinematography consistently emphasizes vastness, whether through wide desert landscapes, expansive Roman architecture, or crowded public arenas filled with thousands of extras. These wide shots are not simply decorative. They're used to communicate the overwhelming power of empire, the insignificance of individuals within political systems, and the emotional isolation of the protagonist. The camera often places Judah Ben-Hur as a small figure within enormous environments, visually reinforcing his struggle against forces much larger than himself. At the same time, the film carefully balances the scale with intimate close-ups. When emotional moments occur, the cinematography shifts to tighter framing, focusing on facial expressions, subtle reactions, and interpersonal tension. This contrast between wide spectacle and close emotional detail is one of the film's most effective visual strategies. It allows the audience to experience both the epic scope of the story and the deeply personal journey of its characters without losing narrative coherence. Lighting plays a crucial role in establishing mood and tone throughout the film. Much of the lighting is naturalistic, particularly in outdoor scenes filmed under the Mediterranean sun. This creates a sense of realism and physical authenticity. However, in interior scenes, lighting becomes more controlled and symbolic. Shadows are often used to suggest moral ambiguity, imprisonment, or emotional conflict. Bright, open lighting is associated with moments of freedom, revelation, or spiritual clarity. The production design and cinematography work closely together to create a visually consistent ancient world. Architectural framing is used extensively, with columns, arches, and stone structures frequently composing the background of scenes. These elements are not only historically inspired, but also visually symbolic, representing the rigidity and permanence of Roman authority. The camera often positions characters within these structures in ways that emphasize entrapment or domination, especially during scenes involving Roman officials or military power. Color also plays a subtle but important role in the film's visual storytelling. While the film was shot in color, the palette is controlled and grounded, avoiding overly saturated tones. Earth tones dominate the Judean environments, while Roman settings often include marble whites and cold grays. This contrast visually distinguishes cultural and ideological differences between opposing worlds. Costumes also contribute to this palette structure, reinforcing character identity and social hierarchy through visual design. The cinematography during action sequences is particularly notable, especially in the chariot race. This sequence represents one of the most complex and influential action scenes ever filmed. The camera is placed at multiple strategic points, including low angles close to the ground, wide overhead shots, and dynamic tracking shots that follow the movement of the chariots. These varied perspectives create a sense of speed, danger, and immersion. The editing rhythm works in harmony with the camera movement, building tension gradually before escalating into full intensity. The use of practical effects and real physical environments significantly enhances the visual authenticity of the film. Instead of relying on artificial effects, the filmmakers constructed massive sets and staged real action with horses, vehicles, and large groups of performers. This commitment to physical realism gives the cinematography a tangible quality that modern digital effects often struggle to replicate. Dust, sunlight, physical impact, and environmental interaction are all captured directly on film, contributing to the sensory realism of the experience. Camera movement in the film is deliberate and controlled. Because of the limitations of the technology at the time, many shots are carefully staged rather than rapidly moving. However, this restraint allows for precise composition. The filmmakers use pans, slow tracking shots, and carefully timed cuts to guide the viewer's attention. Every movement of the camera feels intentional, contributing to the overall rhythm of the storytelling. Depth of field is also used effectively to layer visual information. In many scenes, foreground and background elements are both significant, allowing multiple actions or emotional cues to exist within a single frame. This technique adds complexity to the visual storytelling, encouraging the viewer to actively engage with the composition rather than focusing on a single subject. One of the most important visual achievements of the film is its ability to maintain clarity within large-scale crowd scenes. Coordinating thousands of extras on screen presents a major visual challenge, but the cinematography ensures that the audience can still follow key characters and narrative actions. This is achieved through strategic blocking, lighting contrast, and framing techniques that isolate important figures within chaotic environments. Symbolic cinematography is also present throughout the film. For example, moments of spiritual reflection are often accompanied by softer lighting and more static camera positioning, creating a sense of stillness and contemplation. In contrast, scenes of conflict or tension often use more dynamic compositions, diagonal framing, and increased visual density. The film Ben-Hur is often remembered for its visual grandeur, but its emotional impact is equally driven by its powerful musical score and carefully constructed sound design. The soundtrack, composed by Miklos Rasha, is one of the most celebrated orchestral film scores in cinematic history. It does not merely accompany the film. It actively shapes its emotional structure, reinforces its themes, and elevates its storytelling to a level of operatic intensity. The sound design, though more subtle compared to modern films, plays a crucial role in grounding the epic scale of the narrative in physical reality. The score of Ben-Hur is built on a foundation of classical orchestration, heavily influenced by Romantic and late Romantic symphonic traditions. Rasha approached the composition not as background music, but as a narrative voice that interacts directly with the characters and events on screen. Each major character and theme in the film is supported by distinct musical motifs that evolve as the story progresses. This technique, known as leitmotif composition, allows the music to reflect emotional development in a way that mirrors the film's narrative structure. One of the most important musical elements is the main theme associated with Judah Ben-Hur. This theme is noble, expansive, and emotionally grounded, reflecting his transformation from a privileged prince to a suffering slave and ultimately to a figure of spiritual awakening. The theme changes in tone throughout the film. In the early scenes, it carries a sense of innocence and stability. During his period of slavery and suffering, it becomes more subdued and fragmented. In the final act, it returns in a more complete and emotionally resolved form, symbolizing restoration and forgiveness. The musical representation of Masala is distinctly different. His associated motifs are sharper, more militaristic, and rhythmically rigid. These musical choices reflect his alignment with Roman authority and his internalized discipline. However, the music also subtly reveals his emotional conflict. In certain scenes, the rigid structure of his theme begins to break down, suggesting that beneath his outward control lies tension and moral instability. This duality in the score mirrors the complexity of his character, reinforcing the idea that he is not a purely one-dimensional antagonist. The Roman Empire itself is represented musically through bold brass sections, disciplined rhythmic patterns, and grand orchestral structures. These elements convey power, order, and authority, but also emotional distance. In contrast, the music associated with Judea and personal relationships is often softer, more lyrical, and more emotionally expressive. This contrast between musical worlds reinforces the thematic opposition between institutional power and human intimacy that runs throughout the film. One of the most emotionally significant uses of music in the film occurs during moments of suffering and transformation. During Ben-Hur's time as a galley slave, the score becomes darker, more repetitive, and rhythmically oppressive. The use of percussion and heavy orchestration emphasizes the physical strain and emotional despair of slavery. However, even in these moments, fragments of his main theme occasionally emerge, suggesting that his identity and inner strength are not fully destroyed. The iconic chariot race sequence is one of the greatest achievements in film scoring. The music during this sequence is structured to match the escalating tension of the race itself. It begins with controlled rhythmic energy, gradually building into a full orchestral explosion as the competition intensifies. The pacing of the music is tightly synchronized with the visual editing, creating a unified audio-visual experience. The score enhances a sense of speed, danger, and unpredictability, making the sequence not only visually thrilling, but emotionally overwhelming. Rausch's use of tempo variation is particularly important in this sequence. The music alternates between rapid, driving passages and brief moments of tension-filled silence or reduced instrumentation. These shifts allow the audience to experience both the physical chaos of the race and the psychological focus of the characters. The music does not simply follow the action, it shapes the emotional perception of that action. Religious and spiritual themes in the film are also reflected in the score. Moments associated with forgiveness, revelation, and spiritual transformation are accompanied by more restrained and contemplative musical passages. These sections often use strings and choir-like textures to create a sense of transcendence. The music becomes less about physical action and more about emotional reflection, guiding the audience toward the film's deeper philosophical messages. Silence is another important component of the film's sound design. In several key scenes, the absence of music is just as significant as its presence. Silence is used to emphasize emotional weight, particularly during moments of betrayal, loss, or internal realization. This contrast between sound and silence enhances the impact of the score when it returns, making musical entrances feel more powerful and meaningful. The sound effects in the film are primarily practical and grounded in real physical sources. Horse hooves, chariot wheels, ocean waves, and crowd noise were all carefully recorded or recreated to enhance realism. In the chariot race, the layered sound of wooden wheels, cracking reins, shouting drivers, and pounding horses creates an immersive auditory environment. This complex layering of sound contributes to the sense of chaos and intensity, making the audience feel physically present within the scene. Crowd sound is another essential element of the film's sound design. Large-scale scenes involving Roman arenas or public gatherings required carefully coordinated audio to match the visual scale. The roar of thousands of extras had to feel unified yet dynamic, reflecting shifts in emotion and narrative tension. This was achieved through a combination of recorded crowd sounds and post-production layering techniques. The film Ben-Hur was met with one of the most significant waves of critical attention and audience reaction in the history of cinema. From the moment of its release, it was clear that this was not just another historical epic, but a cultural event that demanded serious critical engagement. The reception of the film was shaped by its unprecedented scale, its emotional storytelling, its technical achievements, and its ambitious attempt to combine spectacle with spiritual and moral depth. Over time, it became one of the most highly awarded and widely discussed films of its era, though it also faced some criticism regarding pacing, tone, and its relationship between spectacle and character development. At the time of release, audiences responded with overwhelming enthusiasm. Many viewers were struck first by the sheer scale of the production. The film offered a level of visual grandeur that was rare even in big-budget Hollywood productions of the time. The chariot race, in particular, became an instant sensation and was widely discussed in newspapers, magazines, and public discourse. Audiences often described the film as an experience rather than simply a movie, reflecting how strongly it stood apart from standard cinematic offerings of the period. Critically, the film was largely praised for its direction under William Wyler, whose careful control of tone and performance helped unify such a massive production. Critics noted that Wyler managed to balance intimate human drama with large-scale spectacle, something that many epic films struggled to achieve. His direction was frequently described as disciplined, precise, and emotionally intelligent, ensuring that the story remained grounded even when the visuals became overwhelming. One of the most celebrated aspects of the film's reception was its success at major award ceremonies. The film achieved a historic level of recognition, winning a record number of Academy Awards at the time. It received awards in major categories, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor, along with numerous technical awards for cinematography, editing, costume design, and musical score. This level of recognition solidified its status not only as a commercial success, but as an artistic achievement recognized by the industry itself. Charlton Heston's performance was widely praised by critics and audiences alike. His portrayal of Judah Ben-Hur was seen as powerful, emotionally controlled, and physically committed. Critics highlighted his ability to carry the emotional weight of the film while maintaining a sense of dignity and strength throughout the character's long journey. His performance became closely associated with the identity of the film itself, and it played a major role in establishing him as a leading figure in Hollywood cinema. Stephen Boyd's portrayal of Messala also received significant attention. Critics appreciated the complexity he brought to the role, noting that Messala was not portrayed as a simple villain, but as a tragic figure shaped by ideology and ambition. This nuance was seen as one of the film's strengths, adding emotional depth to what could have otherwise been a straightforward antagonist role. The dynamic between Ben-Hur and Messala was frequently cited as one of the emotional anchors of the film. The film's technical achievements were another major focus of critical praise. Cinematography, set design, and especially the chariot race sequence were often described as groundbreaking. Many critics emphasized that the film pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible in filmmaking at the time. The scale of production, combined with practical effects and coordinated action sequences, set new standards for epic filmmaking. The visual spectacle was widely considered unmatched in its era. However, despite its overwhelming success, the film was not without criticism. Some reviewers noted that its length and pacing could feel excessive, particularly for modern audiences or those less interested in large-scale historical narratives. The slow build-up in certain sections of the film was sometimes described as uneven, with long stretches of exposition and character development before major action sequences occur. While many appreciated the deliberate pacing, others felt it occasionally hindered narrative momentum. Another area of critique involved the film's balance between spectacle and character depth. Some critics argued that while the film excelled in visual storytelling, certain supporting characters were not as fully developed as they could have been. The focus on Ben-Hur's journey sometimes meant that secondary characters received less narrative attention. However, others countered that this focus was intentional, designed to maintain clarity within a very large and complex story. Religious and philosophical interpretations of the film also generated mixed responses. While many praised its spiritual themes and moral depth, others felt that the religious elements could be interpreted in different ways depending on the viewer's perspective. Some critics viewed the spiritual transformation of Ben-Hur as deeply meaningful and universal, while others saw it as more symbolic and less directly integrated into the narrative structure. Despite these differences, nearly all agreed that the film engaged seriously with questions of faith, forgiveness, and moral transformation. International reception was similarly strong. The film performed well in multiple global markets and was praised for its universal themes that transcended cultural and linguistic boundaries. Audiences around the world responded to its story of betrayal, suffering, and redemption, demonstrating the global appeal of its narrative structure. It helped reinforce the idea that large-scale Hollywood productions could achieve worldwide cultural resonance. Over time, critical opinion of the film has remained largely positive, though modern analysis often places it within the context of changing cinematic styles. Contemporary critics sometimes revisit the film with attention to its pacing and classical storytelling structure, contrasting it with more modern approaches to editing and narrative pacing. However, even in modern criticism, the film is still widely regarded as a masterpiece of classical Hollywood cinema. The direction of William Wyler continues to be a major point of analysis. His ability to manage an enormous production while maintaining narrative coherence is frequently studied in film schools. His approach to directing actors, staging scenes, and balancing spectacle with emotion is considered a model of disciplined filmmaking. The film Ben-Hur has left one of the most enduring legacies in the history of cinema, shaping not only the future of historical epics, but also the broader language of blockbuster filmmaking. Its influence can be seen across decades of film production, storytelling techniques, visual design, and even audience expectations. The legacy of Ben-Hur is not limited to its immediate success. It is a long-term cultural and industrial impact that continues to inform how large-scale cinema is conceived and executed. One of the most important aspects of its legacy is its role in defining the modern epic film. Before Ben-Hur, epic films existed, but they often struggled to balance emotional storytelling with large-scale spectacle. After its release, the film became a reference point for how to successfully integrate both. Filmmakers and studios began to understand that audiences could engage deeply with long, complex narratives if those narratives were supported by strong character arcs and visually immersive environments. This shift influenced a wide range of later productions, especially in historical, fantasy, and adventure genres. The chariot race sequence became one of the most influential action scenes ever created. Its impact can be traced through countless films that followed, particularly those that feature large-scale competitive action or arena-based conflict. Directors studying action choreography often reference the sequence as an example of how to build tension through pacing, camera placement, and editing rhythm. Even modern action cinema, with its advanced technology and digital effects, continues to draw inspiration from the physicality and clarity of this sequence. It demonstrated that action scenes should be both emotionally meaningful and visually coherent. The film also influenced the evolution of production scale in Hollywood. After its success, studios became more willing to invest in large-budget productions that required extensive sets, large casts, and international filming locations. This helped establish a model for blockbuster filmmaking that would later be seen in films such as Lawrence of Arabia, The Ten Commandments, and other large-scale epics. The idea that a single film could redefine industry expectations became more widely accepted as a result of Ben-Hur's success. In terms of storytelling influence, the film helped reinforce the importance of character-driven epic narratives. Rather than relying solely on spectacle, Ben-Hur demonstrated that emotional transformation must remain central to the story. This principle has been carried forward into many modern films, including fantasy epics, superhero films, and historical dramas. The idea of a protagonist undergoing a long moral and emotional journey across multiple phases of suffering and redemption became a standard narrative structure. The film also had a lasting impact on film scoring and musical storytelling. The work of Miklos Rasha influenced generations of composers who sought to integrate leitmotif-based composition into cinematic storytelling. The idea that musical themes could represent characters, emotions, and ideological forces became a standard practice in Hollywood film scoring. Many later epic scores, particularly in fantasy and historical genres, draw directly from the structural techniques used in Ben-Hur's music. Beyond filmmaking, the film also became part of broader cultural memory. Its imagery, particularly the chariot race, became instantly recognizable even to people who had never seen the full film. This kind of cultural saturation is rare and indicates the depth of its influence. The film entered the category of iconic cinema, where specific scenes become symbolic references in advertising, television, comedy, and even political metaphor. The phrase like a chariot race or similar imagery is often used to describe intense competition or high-stakes struggle. The legacy of the film is also evident in its role in shaping audience expectations for cinematic spectacle. After Ben-Hur, audiences began to expect that epic films would deliver both emotional depth and visual grandeur. This expectation has carried into modern cinema, particularly in large-scale productions that aim to create immersive worlds. Films today still rely on the structural balance that Ben-Hur helped establish, where intimate character arcs are set against expansive external conflicts. In film education, Ben-Hur remains a key study text. It is frequently analyzed in terms of production design, narrative structure, cinematography, and direction. Students of cinema often examine how the film manages such a large-scale production while maintaining narrative clarity. The collaboration between departments such as direction, editing, music, and set design is often cited as a model of integrated filmmaking. The film demonstrates how every element of production must work together to support a unified vision. The influence of the film also extends into later reinterpretations and remakes. The story of Ben-Hur has been adapted multiple times in different formats, but the 1959 version remains the most iconic and influential. Later adaptations are often measured against its success, particularly in terms of scale and emotional impact. This shows how strongly the film has defined the identity of the story itself in popular culture. In addition, the film helps solidify the reputation of epic cinema as a serious artistic form rather than mere entertainment. Its critical acclaim and award success demonstrated that large-scale films could achieve both commercial popularity and artistic recognition. This helped elevate the status of genre filmmaking in Hollywood, encouraging studios and filmmakers to pursue ambitious projects without sacrificing artistic integrity. The audience response to Ben-Hur has always been deeply emotional, varied across generations, and shaped by personal cultural and historical contexts. Unlike many films that are remembered primarily for plot or spectacle, Ben-Hur is often remembered for how it makes people feel rather than what it simply shows. Audience interpretation has evolved over time, but the core emotional reactions, admiration, sadness, awe, and reflection, have remained consistent across decades. When the film was first released, audiences experienced it as a monumental event. Many viewers had never seen a film of such scale, and the emotional weight of the story was intensified by the cinematic experience itself. People described feeling overwhelmed by the combination of visual grandeur and intimate human suffering. The story of betrayal between Judah Ben-Hur and Messala resonated strongly, particularly because it reflected universal human experiences such as broken trust, injustice, and the pain of irreversible conflict. Audiences often connected the story not just to historical fiction, but to their own personal experiences of loss or separation. One of the strongest audience reactions centered around the theme of suffering and endurance. Ben-Hur's journey from privilege to slavery and back again created a powerful emotional arc that viewers found both painful and inspiring. Many audiences interpreted his suffering as symbolic of real human resilience. Instead of viewing him purely as a fictional character, viewers often saw him as a representation of anyone who had been unjustly treated or forced to rebuild their life after tragedy. This identification with the protagonist is one of the reasons the film has remained emotionally relevant across generations. The chariot race sequence consistently stands out in audience reflection as one of the most thrilling cinematic experiences ever created. For early audiences, it was often described as breathtaking and physically intense, even causing viewers to react with visible tension or excitement during screenings. Over time, the sequence has taken on almost mythic status in film history. Modern audiences, even those accustomed to advanced visual effects, often still recognize the sequence as emotionally powerful due to its practical realism and carefully constructed tension. Religious audiences have also interpreted the film through a spiritual lens. The presence of Christ and the themes of forgiveness, compassion, and redemption have led many viewers to see the story as a moral journey rather than just a historical drama. Some viewers interpret Ben-Hur's transformation as a reflection of spiritual awakening, where personal revenge is replaced by forgiveness and inner peace. Others interpret more broadly as a universal message about letting go of anger and embracing reconciliation. This flexibility of interpretation has allowed the film to resonate across different belief systems. At the same time, some audiences focus more on the political and social dimensions of the story. From this perspective, Ben-Hur is seen as a narrative about oppression, resistance, and the struggle for dignity under imperial power. Viewers in different historical periods have drawn parallels between the Roman Empire in the film and modern systems of authority or injustice. This has allowed the film to remain relevant even outside its original historical context, as audiences continue to reinterpret its meaning based on contemporary issues. Across generations, younger audiences often approach the film differently than older viewers. Modern viewers sometimes focus more on pacing, structure, and visual style, while older generations tend to emphasize emotional impact and cinematic memory. Despite these differences, both groups frequently agree on the film's importance and emotional power. The difference lies more in interpretation than in appreciation. Another interesting aspect of audience reflection is the way the film is remembered collectively. Many people who have not seen the entire film still recognize key elements, such as a chariot race, the themes of betrayal, and the image of epic Roman settings. This indicates that the film has entered cultural memory in a fragmented but powerful way. It exists not only as a complete narrative, but also as a collection of iconic moments that circulate independently in popular culture. Audiences also often reflect on the emotional transformation of the main character. Judah Ben-Hur's journey from anger to forgiveness is frequently cited as one of the most meaningful aspects of the film. Many viewers interpret this transformation as a personal lesson in emotional growth. The idea that revenge ultimately leads to suffering, while forgiveness leads a piece, is a message that continues to resonate strongly with audiences facing their own interpersonal conflicts. Over time, the film has also become a source of nostalgia for many viewers. It is often associated with classic cinema experiences, family viewings, or early encounters with epic storytelling. This nostalgia connection strengthens emotional attachment to film, even for viewers who may not regularly watch older movies. The film becomes part of personal and collective memory, representing a specific era of cinematic history. In academic and critical discussions, audience interpretation of Ben-Hur is often analyzed as an example of how films can function on multiple levels simultaneously. Some viewers engage with it as entertainment, others as moral storytelling, and others as historical spectacle. This layered reception is part of what makes the film so enduring. It does not force a single interpretation, but allows multiple readings depending on the viewer's perspective. The film Ben-Hur is fundamentally driven by transformation. While its scale and spectacle are immense, the emotional core of the story rests on the development of its central characters and how they evolve under pressure, loss, ideology, and time. The film constructs its narrative around long, gradual arcs that reflect not only external events but deep internal change. Each major character is shaped by conflict, and their journeys are designed to mirror broader themes of identity, betrayal, power, and redemption. The most important character arc belongs to Judah Ben-Hur. At the beginning of the story, he is introduced as a nobleman of high status, confident in his position, secure in his identity, and grounded in loyalty to family and tradition. His early life is defined by stability and trust, especially in his friendship with Messala. However, this foundation is destroyed through betrayal and political conflict. From this point forward, Ben-Hur's arc becomes a long descent into suffering followed by a gradual rebuilding of identity. His transformation begins when he is falsely accused and condemned to slavery. This moment marks the complete stripping away of his social identity. As a galley slave, he is reduced to physical survival, and his sense of self becomes centered on endurance rather than status. This stage of his arc is defined by loss and humiliation, but also by the emergence of inner strength. The experience reshapes his understanding of power, justice, and survival. A key turning point in his development occurs during his time under Quintus Arrius. When Ben-Hur saves Arrius's life, he transitions from a state of suffering into one of opportunity. This moment is significant not only because it changes his external circumstances, but because it begins to reshape his internal motivations. He is no longer only defined by survival, but by a growing desire for justice and meaning. However, this desire initially manifests as revenge, which becomes a dominant emotional force driving his actions. As Ben-Hur gains status and strength in Roman society, his arc enters a phase of empowerment. He becomes physically capable, socially influential, and strategically focused. Yet emotionally, he remains trapped in the past. His identity is now split between his present success and his unresolved trauma. This internal conflict defines much of the middle portion of his arc. He is powerful externally but unsettled internally. The chariot race represents the peak of his revenge-driven arc. It is the moment where his external conflict with Messala reaches its climax. While he achieves victory in this moment, it does not bring emotional resolution. Instead, it exposes the emptiness of revenge as a goal. Messala's defeat does not restore Ben-Hur's family or heal his suffering. This realization marks the beginning of his emotional shift. Following the race, Ben-Hur's arc transitions into a phase of emotional and spiritual reckoning. The discovery of his family's suffering forces him to confront the consequences of his long pursuit of vengeance. This is where his character begins to shift from external focus to internal reflection. The revelation that his mother and sister are alive but afflicted with leprosy deepens his emotional crisis and forces him to reconsider the meaning of justice and suffering. The final stage of Ben-Hur's arc is defined by forgiveness and release. Influenced by witnessing compassion and spiritual teachings, he gradually lets go of his desire for revenge. This is not portrayed as an abrupt change, but as a slow internal process. His transformation culminates in the acceptance of forgiveness over vengeance, marking the completion of his emotional journey. He moves from pride to suffering, from suffering to revenge, and finally from revenge to forgiveness. This progression forms the central emotional spine of the entire film. Messala's character arc operates in contrast to Ben-Hur's, and is equally important to the narrative structure. At the beginning, Messala is portrayed as confident, ambitious, and ideologically aligned with Roman authority. His return to Judea creates the initial conflict between personal loyalty and political duty. Unlike Ben-Hur, who evolves toward emotional openness, Messala becomes increasingly rigid in his worldview. His arc is defined by the tension between personal history and institutional loyalty. As he enforces Roman power, he suppresses his emotional connection to Ben-Hur. This suppression leads to moral conflict, but rather than resolving it, he doubles down on authority and control. His character does not experience redemption, but rather tragic collapse. His injury during the chariot race symbolizes the physical and ideological consequences of his rigidity. Messala's arc serves as a counterpoint to Ben-Hur's transformation. Where Ben-Hur learns to let go of hatred, Messala becomes consumed by it. Where Ben-Hur evolves toward forgiveness, Messala remains trapped in pride and ideology. This contrast reinforces the film's central thematic structure. Secondary characters also undergo smaller but meaningful arcs. Quintus Arrius experiences a transformation from a strict Roman commander to a more compassionate father-like figure. His arc is triggered by his near-death experience and his recognition of Ben-Hur's humanity. This change represents the possibility of moral awakening within systems of power. The film Ben-Hur is widely regarded as a masterpiece not only of storytelling and direction, but also of costume and set design. These visual elements play a crucial role in constructing the film's sense of historical authenticity, emotional depth, and narrative clarity. Every costume, architectural structure, and environmental detail was carefully designed to communicate social hierarchy, cultural identity, and psychological meaning. The production design is not merely decorative. It is an essential storytelling tool that supports the film's themes of power, suffering, and transformation. One of the most striking aspects of set design is the scale and ambition of the constructed environments. Entire cities were built to represent ancient Jerusalem, Roman administrative centers, marketplaces, and domestic spaces. These sets were designed to feel lived in rather than artificial, with layered textures, weathered surfaces, and detailed architectural elements. The goal was to immerse both actors and audiences in a fully realized ancient world that felt historically grounded and emotionally believable. Roman architecture in the film is characterized by symmetry, grandeur, and rigidity. Massive stone columns, wide-open courtyards, and imposing structures dominate Roman spaces. These design choices reflect the themes associated with Roman authority: control, discipline, and institutional power. The visual weight of Roman environments often feels overwhelming, reinforcing the idea that individuals are small within the larger system of empire. The set design visually communicates oppression and hierarchy without the need for dialogue. In contrast, Judean environments are more organic, intimate, and textured. Homes and communal spaces are designed with warmth and detail, emphasizing family life, tradition, and cultural identity. These spaces feel more personal and emotionally grounded, reinforcing the contrast between Roman authority and Judean cultural life. The set design thus becomes a visual representation of the ideological tension at the heart of the film. The galley slave sequences introduce a completely different environment. The interior of the Roman ships is designed to feel dark, cramped, and oppressive. The wooden structures are heavy and functional, with minimal decoration. This environment reflects the physical and psychological brutality of slavery. The design emphasizes confinement and exhaustion, reinforcing Ben-Hur's loss of freedom and identity during this stage of the story. One of the most iconic set pieces in the film is the chariot race arena. This massive structure was built specifically for the production and remains one of the most ambitious practical sets ever constructed in cinema history. The arena is designed with sweeping curves, towering spectator stands, and detailed racing tracks that allow for dynamic movement and visibility. The scale of the set allows the audience to feel both the excitement of the race and the overwhelming pressure of public spectacle. The design ensures that the action is visually clear while maintaining a sense of chaos and intensity. Costume design plays an equally important role in defining character identity and social structure. Roman costumes are highly structured, featuring armor, uniforms, and formal garments that reflect military discipline and political authority. The use of clean lines, metallic elements, and bold colors reinforces the idea of Rome as a powerful and organized empire. High-ranking Roman characters are distinguished by more elaborate and refined costumes, emphasizing hierarchy within the system. In contrast, Judean costumes are simpler, more natural, and more varied in texture. They often use earth tones and softer materials, reflecting a closer relationship to land, tradition, and daily life. These costumes help establish cultural identity visually, allowing the audience to immediately distinguish between different social and political groups. The contrast between Roman and Judean attire reinforces the film's central conflict on a visual level. Judah Ben-Hur's costumes evolve significantly throughout the film, reflecting his character arc. In the beginning, he wears fine garments that represent his noble status and social privilege. After his fall into slavery, his clothing becomes minimal and worn, symbolizing his loss of identity and status. As he regains power and influence, his costumes become more structured and refined again, but they carry a sense of emotional weight, reflecting his internal transformation. By the end of the film, his appearance reflects both strength and emotional maturity, rather than simple social rank. Messala's costumes are designed to emphasize Roman authority and military discipline. His armor and uniforms are sharply defined, often visually imposing. As his character becomes more rigid and ideologically driven, his appearance remains consistent, reflecting his lack of internal transformation. His costume design reinforces his role as a symbol of institutional power, rather than emotional evolution. The attention to detail in both costumes and sets extends to background characters and extras. Thousands of costumes were created to populate large crowd scenes, ensuring visual consistency and realism. This level of detail contributes to the immersive quality of the film, making the world feel expansive and authentic. Even minor characters visually reinforce the social and cultural structures of the story. Lighting interacts closely with set and costume design to enhance visual storytelling. Costumes often reflect light differently depending on material and color, allowing cinematographers to highlight important characters within complex scenes. Sets are designed to support dramatic lighting effects, creating shadows, highlights, and depth that enhance emotional tone. The screenplay of Ben-Hur is a foundational element of its success, providing the narrative structure, thematic clarity, and emotional direction that support its vast visual and technical achievements. Written for the screen as an adaptation of a literary source, the script transforms a long and complex story into a cinematic form that balances intimate character dialogue with sweeping historical narrative. The dialogue is deliberately structured to reflect classical storytelling traditions, emphasizing clarity, moral conflict, and emotional resonance over modern naturalistic speech patterns. One of the defining features of the script is its formal tone. Characters often speak in a measured, deliberate manner that reflects the historical setting and epic scale of the story. This style of dialogue is not intended to mimic casual conversation, but rather to elevate the emotional and philosophical weight of each interaction. As a result, even simple exchanges between characters carry a sense of significance and dramatic tension. The relationship between Judah Ben-Hur and Messala is established early through dialogue that gradually reveals their ideological divergence. Their conversations begin with warmth and familiarity, reflecting their shared past, but slowly shift into tension and confrontation. The writing carefully structures these exchanges to show how personal friendship is eroded by political ideology and ambition. Each line of dialogue between them carries subtext, often expressing loyalty, betrayal, or hidden resentment beneath polite language. One of the strengths of the screenplay is its ability to convey large historical and political ideas through personal interactions rather than abstract exposition. Instead of long explanatory passages, the script uses dialogue to reveal the nature of Roman authority, cultural conflict, and social hierarchy. Characters speak not only as individuals, but also as representatives of larger systems of belief and power. This technique allows the story to remain emotionally grounded while still engaging with complex historical themes. Judah Ben-Hur's dialogue evolves throughout the film, reflecting his character arc. In the early sections of the story, his speech is confident and composed, reflecting his noble status and secure identity. After his betrayal and enslavement, his dialogue becomes more restrained and emotionally charged, often reflecting anger, confusion, or determination. In later stages of the film, Particularly after key moments of transformation, his speech becomes more reflective and measured, indicating emotional maturity and internal resolution. The script uses these changes in tone to mirror his psychological journey. Messala's dialogue is characterized by conviction and ideological certainty. He speaks with authority and discipline, reflecting his role within the Roman military system. However, as the story progresses, subtle shifts in his language reveal internal conflict. Although he remains outwardly firm, moments of hesitation and emotional contradiction appear in his speech. These moments are important because they hint at the tragic nature of his character, suggesting that his ideological rigidity comes at the cost of personal relationships and emotional truth. Esther's dialogue serves a different function within the script. Her speech is often calm, compassionate, and morally grounded. She frequently expresses ideas related to forgiveness, hope, and emotional healing, rather than participating in ideological conflict. She provides a stabilizing voice within the narrative. Her dialogue is simple but meaningful, often cutting through tension with clarity and emotional honesty. She functions as a moral counterbalance to the more intense and conflict-driven conversations of other characters. The screenplay also uses dialogue sparingly in key moments, allowing silence and visual storytelling to carry emotional weight. Some of the most powerful scenes in the film contain minimal spoken language, relying instead on facial expressions, staging, and musical accompaniment. This balance between dialogue and silence demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of cinematic storytelling, where words are used strategically rather than continuously. The script's handling of exposition is particularly notable. Instead of relying on lengthy explanations of historical context, the screenplay integrates necessary information naturally into conversations and situational developments. This allows the audience to learn about the world of the film organically, without feeling overwhelmed by historical detail. The pacing of information delivery is carefully controlled to maintain narrative momentum. The dialogue also reinforces the film's central themes. Conversations about loyalty, justice, power, and forgiveness are woven throughout the script, often appearing in different contexts as the story progresses. Early dialogue may frame justice in terms of revenge or punishment, while later dialogue reframes it in terms of mercy and understanding. This thematic evolution is embedded directly into the writing, ensuring that the script itself reflects the moral journey of the characters. One of the most important aspects of the screenplay is its ability to maintain coherence across a very large narrative scale. The story spans many years, multiple locations, and numerous supporting characters, yet the dialogue remains consistent in tone and purpose. This consistency helps unify the film's sprawling structure, ensuring that each scene contributes to the overall emotional arc. The chariot race sequence is notable for its minimal use of dialogue. Instead of spoken words, the screenplay relies on visual tension and musical scoring to convey meaning. This decision highlights the script's understanding of when not to use dialogue, allowing the most intense moments of the story to unfold without verbal explanation. The absence of speech during this sequence enhances its dramatic impact. The final sections of the screenplay shift toward more reflective and emotionally resolved dialogue. Conversations become quieter and more introspective, reflecting the resolution of major conflicts. The language used by characters becomes less confrontational and more focused on reconciliation and understanding. This shift in tone mirrors the completion of the narrative and emotional arcs. The release and promotion of Ben-Hur represented one of the most ambitious marketing efforts in the history of mid-20th century cinema. At the time, Hollywood was facing increasing competition from television, and studios were under pressure to convince audiences that the theatrical experience was still essential. The marketing strategy for Ben-Hur was therefore built around scale, spectacle, prestige, and emotional intensity, positioning the film not just as entertainment, but as an unforgettable cultural event that demanded to be experienced on the largest possible screen. From the earliest stages of promotion, the film was framed as a monumental achievement. Marketing materials emphasized the scale of production, the size of the cast, and the unprecedented nature of its action sequences. Rather than focusing solely on plot details, promotional campaigns highlighted the experience of the film itself. Posters and print advertisements often featured imagery of chariots, Roman architecture, and dramatic confrontations, designed to communicate intensity and grandeur even before audiences entered the theater. The studio also relied heavily on the reputation of its director, William Wyler, whose name was associated with prestige filmmaking. His involvement was presented as a guarantee of quality and artistic seriousness. This emphasis on directorial authority helped position the film as more than a typical historical epic. It was marketed as a carefully crafted artistic work on an unprecedented scale, blending entertainment with high production values. Another key element of the marketing strategy was the emphasis on technological innovation. The film was promoted as a breakthrough in cinematic technique, particularly in terms of its large-scale set design, cinematography, and action choreography. The chariot race sequence was heavily featured in promotional materials, often described as one of the most exciting and realistic action scenes ever filmed. This created anticipation and curiosity, encouraging audiences to experience the spectacle firsthand. Word of mouth also played a crucial role in the film's promotional success. After early screenings, audience reactions were overwhelmingly positive, and reports of the film's emotional and visual impact spread rapidly. Many viewers described the film as a must-see event, which helped sustain interest over an extended theatrical run. In an era before digital media and online advertising, this kind of organic audience response was essential to long-term box office success. The film's premiere events were also highly publicized. Large-scale theatrical premieres were designed to attract media attention and generate excitement. These events often featured elaborate presentations, highlighting the film's grandeur and reinforcing its status as a major cultural occasion. The premiere was not just a screening but a spectacle in itself, reflecting the film's themes of scale and importance. International marketing efforts were equally significant. The film was distributed across numerous global markets, with promotional materials adapted to different languages and cultural contexts. However, the core messaging remained consistent. This was an epic story of human struggle, betrayal, and redemption that transcended cultural boundaries. The universality of its themes made it particularly effective in international promotion, allowing it to resonate with audiences around the world. Merchandising, while not as expansive as modern blockbuster campaigns, still played a role in reinforcing the film's presence in popular culture. Programs, posters, and related printed materials were widely circulated. These items helped extend the film's visibility beyond the theater, allowing audiences to engage with its imagery and themes in everyday contexts. Another important aspect of the promotional strategy was the use of critical endorsements and award positioning. As the film gained recognition from critics and industry organizations, this acclaim was incorporated into advertising campaigns. Award nominations and wins were used as proof of quality, reinforcing the idea that the film was not only popular but also artistically significant. This dual appeal was central to its long-term success. The studio also carefully managed the film's long theatrical release strategy. Unlike modern films that often have shorter theatrical windows, Ben-Hur was allowed to remain in theaters for extended periods. This slow rollout helped build momentum over time, allowing audiences to gradually discover the film and share recommendations. The extended release strategy contributed significantly to its record-breaking commercial performance. The marketing of Ben-Hur also benefited from its positioning as an event film. Rather than being marketed as a routine release, it was framed as a once-in-a-lifetime cinematic experience. This framing encouraged audiences to prioritize viewing it in theaters rather than waiting for alternative formats. The idea of missing out on a cultural milestone was a powerful motivator in its promotional success. Visually, the marketing materials relied heavily on iconic imagery. Posters often featured dramatic compositions of chariots, intense character expressions, and monumental architectural backdrops. These visuals were designed to capture attention quickly and convey the emotional stakes of the film, without requiring extensive explanation. The marketing relied on visual storytelling that mirrored the film's own cinematic approach. The film Ben-Hur occupies a unique position in cinematic history, and its significance becomes even clearer when compared to other films within the historical epic genre, earlier adaptations of the same story, and other works by filmmakers operating in similar creative spaces. A comparative analysis reveals how the film refined existing storytelling traditions, redefined technical standards, and distinguished itself through its balance of emotional depth and large-scale spectacle. One of the most direct comparisons is with earlier silent and early sound adaptations of the Ben-Hur story, particularly the 1925 version of Ben-Hur. While the earlier adaptation was groundbreaking for its time and also featured a famous chariot race sequence, the 1959 version expanded the scale, emotional complexity, and technical sophistication of the narrative. The earlier film focused more heavily on visual spectacle, relying on the novelty of large-scale action scenes, whereas the 1959 version integrated these spectacles more deeply into a structured emotional and thematic journey. The difference highlights the evolution of filmmaking from spectacle-driven storytelling to character-driven epic narrative. When compared to other historical epics of the same era, such as the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur stands out for its tighter emotional focus. While both films deal with biblical or historical themes and feature large casts and grand production design, Ben-Hur places greater emphasis on personal transformation and internal conflict. The emotional arc of Judah Ben-Hur is more central and consistently developed throughout the narrative, whereas other epics sometimes distribute narrative attention across multiple storylines or emphasize spectacle over character psychology. In comparison to films like Spartacus, Ben-Hur shares similarities in themes of oppression, resistance, and human dignity under imperial power. However, the tone and narrative focus differ significantly. Spartacus emphasizes collective rebellion and political resistance, while Ben-Hur focuses more on individual transformation and moral evolution. This distinction highlights two different approaches to epic storytelling, one centered on collective identity and social revolution, the other on personal redemption and spiritual awakening. When analyzed alongside later epic and fantasy films, such as Gladiator, clear lines of influence can be observed. Gladiator adopts many structural elements similar to Ben-Hur, including a protagonist who suffers betrayal, experiences slavery or degradation, and ultimately seeks revenge before moving toward emotional resolution. However, Gladiator adopts a more modern cinematic tone, with faster pacing, more intense action editing, and a darker psychological atmosphere. Ben-Hur, by contrast, maintains a more classical structure with longer narrative build-up, more formal dialogue, and a stronger emphasis on moral clarity. Comparing Ben-Hur to modern blockbuster franchises, such as large-scale fantasy or superhero films, reveals its foundational influence on cinematic structure. Many modern films use similar narrative arcs involving the rise, fall, and redemption of a central hero. However, modern films often rely more heavily on rapid pacing, digital effects, and serialized storytelling across multiple installments. Ben-Hur remains distinct in its self-contained narrative structure, where the entire emotional journey is completed within a single film experience. From a directorial perspective, comparing William Wyler to other epic filmmakers reveals his unique approach to balancing intimacy and scale. Unlike directors who prioritize either visual spectacle or character drama, Wyler consistently integrates both. His approach differs from more visually driven directors who focus on stylistic intensity, as well as from more minimalist directors who prioritize psychological realism over spectacle. Wyler's style in Ben-Hur represents a middle ground where emotional storytelling and visual grandeur reinforce each other. When compared to religious epics and faith-based narratives, Ben-Hur also stands apart in its subtlety. Rather than presenting religious themes in a direct or didactic manner, the film integrates spiritual ideas through character development and narrative consequences. This contrasts with films that explicitly focus on religious teaching or symbolic retellings. The result is a film that can be interpreted both as a spiritual narrative and as a secular story of human transformation, depending on the viewer's perspective. In relation to other films within Charlton Heston's career, Ben-Hur represents one of his most emotionally complex and physically demanding roles. While he often portrayed strong historical or biblical figures, this role required a longer and more nuanced emotional arc than many of his other performances. Compared to more straightforward heroic roles, Judah Ben-Hur is defined not only by strength but by vulnerability, loss, and internal moral conflict. From a technical standpoint, when compared to earlier cinematic achievements, Ben-Hur pushed production design, cinematography, and practical effects to new limits. While earlier films had experimented with large-scale sets and crowd scenes, this film integrated those elements into a cohesive narrative structure with unprecedented coordination. Later films would surpass it in technological sophistication, particularly with digital effects, but few would match its reliance on physical production scale and real-world coordination. In comparison to modern interpretations of epic storytelling, Ben-Hur is often viewed as more classical in structure and pacing. Modern films tend to use faster editing, more fragmented narrative structures, and more ambiguous moral outcomes. Ben-Hur maintains a clearer moral progression, where the protagonist's journey is defined by identifiable stages of transformation. This clarity is part of what makes the film accessible across generations, even as cinematic styles evolve.